Hello, and welcome to the Dyslexia Information Series, Part 2, The World of Dyslexia, a Deeper Dive. My name is Ashley. I'm one of the co-founders of the Dyslexia Initiative, and thank you for joining this session. So welcome back to Part 2. Here we are again. As I said last time, I'm greeting you as a friend, because if you're here, then you're a part of our large and diverse dyslexia community. Our role within this community is to be a resource, a friend, a cheerleader, a sympathetic shoulder, a listening ear, or whatever it is that we need. We here at the Dyslexia Initiative believe that we each have a responsibility to each other, to be an ally in helping others navigate the road of dyslexia within education. We're all parents, and as a result, we're all parent advocates. Our mission here at DI is to educate and empower as many people as we can so that everyone can be the best possible parent advocate they can be. Our children deserve nothing less, and we hope we can help give you the information and tools that you need to do just that. The only caveat I will give is we are not attorneys, so nothing shown or discussed here should be considered legal advice. And with that, let's get started. Some quick announcements. Don't forget to check out Dyslexia Coffee Talk. When it's scheduled, it airs live on Facebook on our page on Saturdays at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. And don't forget that it's also a podcast. So you can listen to it on your favorite podcast platform or head over to our YouTube channel and watch from there. The Parent Sessions is a free series where the science of reading is broken down for parents. Sessions 1 through 12 covers developing early language skills. And as of the date of this recording, future sessions are underway, so please check those out too. All handouts, links, and more may be viewed on our website. And don't forget to register while you're over on our website for our free quarterly newsletter and other announcements as they become available. We never buy or sell information, so your registration is kept strictly confidential. We have a pretty big agenda for this session. We're going to talk about the differences between balanced and structured literacy. We're going to talk about measuring reading gaps, then the importance of written expression, followed by accommodations and assistive technology. And we're going to talk about it's just not working, so now what? We'll end by quickly looking at some resources and some helpful links. So, balanced literacy versus structured literacy. The reading wars, its history and why. The opposing sides. Side number 1, whole language. This is a discredited philosophy of reading, originally developed for teaching literacy in English. It's based on the premise that learning to read English comes naturally to humans, especially young children, in the same way that learning to speak develops naturally. The method became a major model for education in the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Great Britain in the 1980s and 1990s, despite there being no scientific support for the method's effectiveness. Whole language holds the idea that learning to read and write English is analogous to learning to speak, a natural, unconscious process best fostered by unstructured immersion in an atmosphere rich in simple printed text and in reading aloud. Small children will make a wondrous associative leap from knowing the alphabet to being able to read whole words. Their minds receive print as if each word were a Chinese ideogram. If a word is unfamiliar, it can be skipped, guessed at, or picked up from context. Balanced literacy is a theory of teaching reading and writing that arose in the 1990s and has a variety of interpretations. For some, balanced literacy strikes a balance between whole language and phonics and puts an end to the so-called reading wars. Others say that balanced literacy in practice usually means that the whole language approach to reading. Some proponents of balanced literacy says that it uses research-based elements of comprehension, vocabulary, fluency, phonemic awareness, and phonics, and includes instruction and a combination of the whole group, small group, and one-to-one instruction in reading, writing, speaking, and listening with the strongest research-based elements of each. They go on to say that the components of balanced literacy approach include many different strategies applied during reading and writing workshops. On the other hand, critics, such as myself, say that balanced literacy, like whole language, is a meaning-based approach that when implemented does not include the explicit teaching of sound-letter relationships as provided by systematic phonics. Instead, balanced literacy is simply whole language with some phonics sprinkled in the kindergarten years and the first half of first grade. And that's it. The science of reading is a comprehensive body of research that encompasses years of scientific knowledge. It spans across many languages and shares the contributions of experts from relative disciplines such as education, special education, literacy, psychology, neurology, and more. The science of reading has evolved from a wide span of research designs, experimental methods, participants, and statistical analyses. This conclusive, empirically supported research provides us with the information we need to gain a deeper understanding of how we learn to read, what skills are involved, how they work together, and which parts of the brain are responsible for reading development. From this research, we can identify as evidence-based best practice approach for teaching foundational literacy skills called structured literacy. David Kilpatrick stated, "We teach reading in different ways, and they, the students, learn to read proficiently in only one way. The science of reading has demystified any wonder of how we learn to read and offers evidence backed by science to confirm that there is one right way to teach reading. In addition to this, the science of reading offers key information to drive our approach to instruction and to reach all learners." If you want to know more about the origin of the reading wars, I recommend first, Failing Students or Failing Schools by Faith Burkowski, where she gives an amazing breakdown of the history of reading, the opposing sides, and how we got where we are today. Second is The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler, where she breaks down not just the history of reading, but the various educational theories and the evolution of the schools of thought that have brought education as a whole to where it is today. And there's an article in theatlantic.com, the link is here, printed in 1997, that gives a pretty robust explanation of the origin of the reading wars. It's a fantastic article. So, the history of the reading wars and why. Is it over? The short answer, no. Both sides are entrenched, and neither is giving up anytime soon. Those dedicated to the pedagogy of balanced literacy, because it is a pedagogy, will die on the hill defending it. Those of us entrenched on the side of the science of reading, aka structured literacy, will do the same. Compromise does not exist, and that's why neither side can or will budge. We know how the brain learns how to read, and we are committed to ensuring the educational establishment understands this and at long last adopts it in every classroom across the country. Later on in this presentation, we will talk about NAEP and the related scores that NAEP shows us regarding reading proficiency in this country. This data lies at the heart of the science of reading argument, along with the empirical evidence regarding how the brain learns how to read. There is a cycle that's playing out across the educational landscape that has to be stopped. The publishing companies that put out the various balanced literacy-based reading curriculums in American schools are the backers of various research and books that teachers engage in. These researchers and authors tend to be university educators. These educators receive funding from the publishing companies to support their work. These educators, funded by publishing companies who print the balanced literacy curriculums, are the ones teaching future educators. It is also difficult to break various pedagogical holds once they've taken root. And that's what has happened within the universities across the country regarding the teaching colleges. Teachers are ingrained with various balanced literacy ideas, but their programs are devoid of the science of how the brain learns how to read. The end result is teachers are coming out of universities every year with a certain idea of how to teach reading, and then they go into school districts who not only embrace these ideas, but they have the very curriculum which uphold these same pedagogies. So if one is never taught, shown, or exposed to the science of reading, how then can they be responsible for ensuring your child is taught via the science of reading? That's why teachers are not to blame. I can't recall where I read or heard it. It was likely in Faith Rakowski's book, Failing Students or Failing Schools. The notion that it's rather remarkable that on university campuses where the actual studies of how the brain learns to read are occurring, that teacher colleges right next door seem ignorant of that science and continue spewing forth the pedagogy of balanced literacy. This is a great way to look at it, but it doesn't have a simple answer. More politics than I think anyone is aware lies at the heart of those ideals which control American education. Many ask why our education system can't be like this country or that country, but the reason why comes down to how much our government is willing to mandate what can and cannot happen regarding standards and curriculums, and how much the states across the country are willing to accept any standards laid down by someone else. There's a lot more that goes into the schools of thought, the people that are funding it, the various ideals, etc., than really I think most people understand. This isn't a political speech or an attempt to sway you one way or the other, but to open your eyes to the realization that changing education won't be easy, but it certainly is not impossible. Numerous pedagogical ideas have come and gone across the last century. We just need to hold on to science reading and never quit fighting for what we know about how the brain learns how to read. All of that being said, the battlefield before you is vast. It's important to understand the dynamics of your own state's educational model, the work dynamic of schools, how much of a voice individual teachers really have, who are the change makers, and more. For some, even though they know better, they're never going to do better. For some, even though they know better, they can't do better because they may lose their job if they speak out. For some, even though they know better, they will try to sneak in some helpful educational tools aligned with the science of reading. They're going to do this behind closed doors, and they're the quiet heroes. Know that training can be very expensive. It's on people's own time, and it's not paid for by their employers. Some parents are going to say, who cares? We as parents have to learn on our own time and at our own expense. Regardless, be careful. You never know what's going on in somebody else's life, what commitments or issues are going on there, and it's not our place to judge. So find your own path, and as I like to say, educate and empower yourself. So here is an image that many of our children have been sent home with from school. Eagle eye, lips the fish, stretchy snake, chunky monkey, skippy frog, Tryon lion, flippy dolphin, and helpful kangaroo. To be clear, these strategies will never teach a child how to read. They're not based in evidence, and they enforce poor reading habits. So never assume that the school or teacher understands how best to teach reading. If the district uses balanced literacy, nothing your child is being taught will ever help them learn how to read. If you know the science, champion the science, and never, ever give up. So here's why balanced literacy can never and will never work. This is a fantastic video that is very much worth sharing. So I'm going to switch my screen real quick. And here we go.
Hi there. I'm the mom of a first grade student. I've started getting curious about how my child is learning how to read in school. I'm a PhD level behavioral scientist, and I made this video because I'm trying to make sense of some contradictions I see between the well-established science of reading and how kids are actually being taught to read. Here's one thing I'm really confused about. Perhaps you've noticed your child being assigned books according to their just right reading level. These reading levels follow the alphabet like A, B, C, etc. What's strange is that these books often contain words that are pretty hard for a little kid to sound out, such as community or purple. It seems like kids are just supposed to memorize these words. To make it easier, kids are taught tricks for how to guess words when they get stuck. They can, for example, guess a word that makes sense. They can use the picture to guess the word, and they can even just skip the word entirely. Now you might be wondering, can't kids also just use phonics? It's true that phonics is suggested as one of various tools kids can use to figure out a word, but as I hope will become clear over the course of this video, what's actually happening in the early grades is that kids are not learning enough phonics skills to sound out the types of words that show up in the books they are actually reading. Furthermore, the other cue-based strategies, such as guessing from pictures or from context, are, according to experts, actually undermining their ability to read. All of this controversy got me wondering, will my kid learn how to read this way? I decided to do an experiment to find out, using Reading A to Z, also known as Raz Kids. This popular reading app uses books at the just right reading level. So I'm going to show you an online book, but what we learn here should apply to regular books that also use these just right levels. Here's how I did my experiment. First, I had my daughter read a book on Raz Kids. Then I had her read the same story, but this time with the pictures covered. Then I had her read the harder words from the story with no pictures and no context. And finally, I tested these words again the next day to see how much my daughter had learned. So what do you think? Will she learn these new words even though she doesn't have the phonics skills to sound these words out? Let's see what happened.
I ate paint my swing purple. I paint the fence purple.
Yeah, it's amazing how you're reading without even looking at the words.
I paint the door purple.
Great.
Look at all that purple.
Mm-hmm.
I paint my mom purple. Mom doesn't ought not like purple. It paint.
Overall, not too bad, and she's nailing the word purple. Let's see what happens when we take away the pictures.
I put my swig. Up,
Okay, great.
up.
Okay.
Paint.
Okay. That's not what I was expecting. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
I.
It doesn't work that way. You can tell she's really thrown off by the lack of pictures. She even forgets momentarily how to sound out words at all. It's a little hard without the picture.
Paint. I like paint. The. Fen.
Good.
Purple.
Okay.
I paint the door purple.
Nice. She's starting to get the hang of it again. She doesn't have pictures to look at, but the sentences are pretty repetitive, so she can kind of figure it out from the context and the pattern.
Mom. Does not like purple paint.
Nice. That was a strong finish. Now let's see what happens when she doesn't have any pictures or context to help her.
Swing.
All right.
Paint.
Okay. Let's see how she handles words that she doesn't really know how to sound out. Those words were a little tricky, but she'll definitely get this word. I mean, she saw this word, what, a million times? It's like she'd never seen the word before in her life. You can actually see the camera frame shaking because I'm so stunned. When we tried again the next day, it wasn't much better. I wasn't expecting this at all. How could she be exposed to a word so many times, have it appear on every single page, and then not even recognize it 5 minutes later? Now, she did get some words right without pictures or context, but check out how her accuracy changed over time. The green boxes represent correct responses. When the pictures went away, her accuracy suffered. When she tried the words without pictures or context, she did get some words right, but notice which words they were. They were the words she was able to sound out. The words she previously guessed from pictures or context, she could no longer read once those cues were taken away, nor could she read them the next day. Okay, but you might be wondering, why didn't you just help your kid learn those new words? But here's the thing, in first grade, parents are really encouraged to let their kids read these books independently. Here's a video directed to parents that explains this.
Their teacher is helping them be independent. Support your child in being independent. You could provide your child with a timer if you want them to read and try to stretch their stamina, but also reread their texts over and over again. We want to encourage children to keep reading, or even that they're reading with a stuffed animal or an action figure. They take some time to set up a reading spot where they can focus on their reading with limited distractions.
Now, I'm not saying that it's all independent reading, but there is a lot of it. And it's not clear to me how a beginning reader who doesn't yet know how to read a lot of words is going to learn how to sound out new words and learn from her mistakes without a grown-up looking over her shoulder. Maybe if we want kids to read independently, we should give them books with words they have actually been taught how to read. So this brings me back to the word purple. Why was it so difficult for my daughter to learn how to read this word, even though she was able to guess purple by looking at pictures and guess it again by looking at context? Well, it turns out that guessing words from different clues, such as pictures, context, or repetitive sentence patterns, is a highly inefficient and ineffective way to learn how to read. Incredibly, this method, which is called 3-cueing, is strongly promoted in the Lucy Calkins Reading Workshop curriculum, one of the best-selling reading programs in the U.S. Many children who learn these methods have to be retrained later before they can learn to read properly. But here you might be wondering, don't we all use context to better understand what we're reading? Sure, we do use context for reading comprehension. However, before we can comprehend what we read, we must read the actual words themselves. This is known as decoding. If you can't properly decode, context is not going to help you make much sense of what you're reading. Research has shown that people who are successful readers automatically process all the letters of a word as they are decoding. They do this because at some point when they were little, they learned how to sound out the words using the letters. People who are successful readers do not use 3-cueing. They do not decode words from context, from pictures, or from sentence patterns. This makes sense if you think about it. You're not going to be very successful reading the words in the Constitution or the Gettysburg Address if you're hunting around for clues. Decades of research have shown that it is in fact poor readers who continue to decode words using clues. People who read this way are slower at reading, they read more inaccurately, and they are more likely to find reading difficult and unpleasant. Unfortunately, school districts such as ours across the country have spent millions of dollars on curricula that promote these ineffective strategies. Parents, educators, and activists have begun mobilizing to demand that kids start getting instruction that aligns with the science of reading. So you might be wondering, what actually does work to teach a kid how to read the word purple? Well, to find out the answer to that question, please watch part 2 of this series, where I do another experiment, this time using phonics.
Okay, let's shift back to presentation. So I hope that you found that informative of some of the fallacies behind why balanced literacy, whole language are not effective instructional methods. I do encourage you to watch part 2 of the series, which is listed in our helpful links. So how do you measure reading gaps? Let's first talk about the Matthew effect. Sociologist Richard Burton and his wife Harriet Zuckerman are credited with creating the term Matthew effect in the scientific community in 1968. Later, Keith Stanovich, a psychologist who has done extensive research on reading and language disabilities, applied it to education and more specifically to reading. In the educational community, Matthew effect refers to the idea that in reading, as in other areas of life, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. When children fail at early reading and writing, they begin to dislike reading. They read less than their classmates who are stronger readers. When children with disabilities do not receive adequate remediation, they read less and learn less from reading than non-disabled children. As a consequence, they don't gain vocabulary, background knowledge, and information about how reading material is structured. In short, the word rich get richer, while the word poor get poorer. This is called the Matthew effect. Because some IQ subtests measure information learned from reading, Poor readers will score lower on these subtests. Over years, the gap between poor readers and good readers, grows. For children with disabilities in the primary grades, reading and writing failure is pervasive. Nearly all children who are identified as having a disability have reading and writing difficulties. Now let's talk about a legal issue, specifically James Brody's case. James was found eligible for special education in the 3rd grade. After 3 years of special education, he was retested. According to the new testing, his IQ had dropped from 127 to 109. 2 years later, James was retested again, and his IQ had dropped even further. The experts testified that James's declining IQ test scores was an example of the Matthew effect, and evidence, therefore, that James was not receiving appropriate remediation. The administrative law judge and the review officer agreed and found that the school district had not provided James with an appropriate education. The Matthew effect is not only about the progressive decline of slow starters, but also about the widening gap between slow starters and fast starters. In reading, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And what this report presents a framework for conceptualizing development of individual differences in reading ability that emphasizes the effects of reading on cognitive development and on bootstrapping relationships involving reading. It uses the framework to explain some persisting problems in the literature on reading disability and to conceptualize remediation efforts in reading. This graph represents a typical Matthew effect. In green at the bottom, the poor readers you can see are advancing at a slower pace than the good readers above them as they progress in age, upward in their reading achievement. The gap that grows is what we specifically refer to as the gap that our struggling readers have from what their grade level expectations may be. So the question that we therefore ask is, from a remediation perspective, how do you intend to close the gap? This is what we must all be focused on, and this is what remediation must target. Anything less than closing the gap to achieve effective remediation and bring the struggling reader to grade level expectations is less than acceptable and will always leave the child behind. Closing the gap must be the primary focus of all remediation. So moving on, let's discuss NAPE. NAPE is otherwise known in its proper name as the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's a report issued by the US government every 2 years on the current state of educational achievement across various courses and grades. The primary benchmarks for reading have been 4th and 8th, and 12th has just been added in. It's important to note that NAPE is an accommodated assessment. It's across a random set of schools across the country. To access the nation's report card, I've provided the link here. 2019 was the last benchmark year. New results were supposed to be updated in 2021, but the pandemic pushed everything back. So the next results are supposed to be generated in 2022. We shall see, and certainly hope for those reports. When you look at the NAPE scores, it's important to understand the 3 buckets with which NAPE represents their results. The bottom tier of the buckets is called NAPE Basic. Essentially, this is anything barely or not achieving grade level, barely showing any kind of mastery of prerequisite knowledge and skills that are necessary to perform proficiently. NAPE Proficient is solid academic performance on the NAPE assessment at the grade level. Therefore, it demonstrates competency over challenging subject matter, including subject matter knowledge, application of such knowledge to real-world situations, and analytical skills appropriate to the subject matter. And then NAEP Advanced, the top tier, signifies superior performance above and beyond NAEP Proficient. So again, NAEP Basic, below grade level. NAEP Proficient, grade level. NAEP Advanced, above grade level. Per the 2019 results that were released, you can see here, this is for fourth graders at or above NAEP Proficient. And you can see down the left of each graph, the subsequent years of the testing before. You can see with the NAEP Proficient scale on the left, some rather dismal results. For the year 2019, at or above NAEP Proficient was 35%. At or above NAEP Basic, the lowest tier, was at 66%. So if 35% of our fourth graders are at or above NAEP Proficient, that doesn't bode very well for how well our educational system is teaching our children how to read. Looking at the eighth grade, for 2019, at or above NAEP Proficient was even lower at 34%. At or above NAEP Basic was even higher at 73%. Honestly, these are scores that should deeply disturb everybody that has access to them and can see them, can understand them. These types of scores should be keeping us awake at night. This is a rather dismal performance of our children within our educational system across the country. So the NAEP scores are a powerful tool that we as advocates use to call out the deficiency in American education pedagogy on how we're teaching reading. This is the American standard benchmark for how the educational establishment is failing our children. And naturally, as with all things, there are detractors to this report. But the facts are that this is the best report that we have on current education across the country. But bear in mind, again, that NAEP is accommodated. This means that children like ours are given accommodations when the assessment is administered. So what the actual reading scores across the country without the aid of accommodations is unknown. So just think, if the scores are this low with accommodations in place, what then is the current state of education across the country? Moving on to the GORT and the KTEA. The GORT is the Gray Oral Reading Test, is one of the most widely used measures of oral reading fluency and comprehension in the US. It identifies students who may need more intensive or explicit instruction in reading in order to make adequate progress in reading facility and or comprehension. Diagnose specific reading disabilities in children through young adults. Compare intra-individual reading skills, meaning reading rate versus comprehension, and to help tailor interventions to the student's specific needs. It helps evaluate students' progress in reading using pre- and post-intervention testing. It's important to note that there are two forms of the GORT. One that allows the child where the test is being administered to correct, and one where the child cannot correct. Both should be administered. The GORT will report to you rate, accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. The second one is the Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, 3rd edition, KTEA. It's an individually administered battery that provides in-depth assessment and evaluation of key academic skills. It provides academic skills in reading, math, written language, and oral language. Please note that I have put in bold and underlined the words written language. This will give you grade level assessment of your child's written language output, which is important as an advocate as we seek to get our children what they need within the educational environment. It measures progress in response to intervention, and identifies learning disabilities, and adjusts instruction based on performance. So in reference to the GORT, let's talk about accuracy, fluency, rate, comprehension, and prosody. But we're not really going to do it in that order. We're going to do it slightly out of order. First, let's talk about accuracy. Reading accuracy is consequently, the automatic process of interpretation and integration of appropriate expressions or phrases during the reading process with a minimal use of required resources in the aim of communicating meaning within a text. See, I made 2 accuracy errors in reading that statement. But I was able to self-correct and I still understood exactly what I was reading. Rate, otherwise known as reading speed, is the number of words a person can read correctly per minute. Reading speed, it's part of a broader skill called reading fluency. And this is the term for being able to read accurately and at a good pace with the right expression or intonation, as well as comprehension. And I'm going to circle back to the idea of rate when I get to fluency. Comprehension is understanding and interpreting what is read. To be able to accurately understand written material, children need to be able to, 1, decode what they read, 2, make connections between what they read and what they already know, and 3, think deeply about what they've read. One big part of comprehension is having a sufficient vocabulary or knowing the meaning of enough words. Readers who have strong comprehension are able to draw conclusions about what they read, what's important, what is a fact, what caused an event to happen, which characters are funny, etc. Thus, comprehension involves combining reading and thinking and reasoning. Prosody is a term that means expressive reading. It comprises all of the variables of timing, phrasing, emphasis, and intonation that speakers use to help convey aspects of meaning and to make their speech more lively. In other words, it's the tone and inflection. Do you go up at the end of the sentence that ends in a question mark? Do you pause between commas? All of that dramatic effect when we read, that's prosody. Now let's talk about fluency, because this is really critical. Fluency is defined as the ability to read with speed, accuracy, and proper expression. In order to understand what they read, children must be able to read fluently, whether they're reading aloud or silently. When reading aloud, fluent readers read in phrases and add intonation appropriately. Their reading is smooth and it has expression. Children who do not read with fluency sound choppy and awkward. Those students may have difficulty with decoding skills, or they may just need more practice with speed and smoothness in reading. Fluency is also important for motivation. Children who find reading laborious tend to not want to read. As readers head into upper elementary grades, fluency becomes increasingly important. The volume of reading required in upper elementary years escalates dramatically. Students whose reading is slow or labored will have trouble meeting the reading demands of their grade level. So an important thing is some people believe that comprehension can be achieved without fluency, when in fact fluency is critical for comprehension. A child's comprehension is only going to go so far with the text that they're reading if they are not fluent. But let's go back to that idea of speed, rate, when it comes to fluency. The National Reading Panel provided that portion of the definition of fluency, and it's been taken out of context since they did so. The idea is that a fluent reader is a reader who is reading very quickly with accuracy and comprehension and proper prosody, when in fact, it doesn't necessarily matter how fast the person is reading, as long as they're not reading choppy and awkward, but reading well. So let's think about Scarborough's rope for a moment. You have each of the strand of the rope, and each strand comes together and weaves into the greater rope. For a reader to be fluent, they must achieve fluency with each individual strand within the rope. The concept of reading fluency is here where the rope is woven together. Each of those strands has come together and woven into the solid rope. That's reading fluency. And a child is never going to have good reading fluency if there is not sufficient fluency somewhere within all of these strands. So if there's any weakness over here, the child is going to struggle over here. That is critical to understand and must be addressed properly within any remediation that the child is given. Shanahan said old measures of fluency, like informal reading inventories, looked at accuracy alone, which is only adequate with beginning readers. The problem with accuracy measures is that they overrate the plotters, who can slowly and laboriously get the words right, as if they were reading a meaningless list of random words. Dibble's was an important advance over that because it included rate and accuracy, which is sufficient in the primary grades, but which overrates the hurried readers who can speed through text without appropriate expression. Studies are showing that prosody is not particularly discriminating in the earlier grades, but as kids progress, it gains in importance, probably because the syntax gets more complex and prosody or expression is an indicator of how well kids are sorting that out, rather than just decoding quickly enough to allow comprehension. So speaking of Dibble specifically, Dibble's is the dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills. It's a set of procedures and measures for assessing acquisition of literacy skills. They're designed to be short 1-minute fluency measures that can be used to regularly detect risk and monitor the development of early literacy and early reading skills in kindergarten through 8th grade. Dibble's was developed to measure recognized and empirically validated skills related to general reading outcomes. Each subtask has been thoroughly researched and demonstrated to be a reliable and valid indicator of early literacy development. When implemented as recommended, Dibble's results can be used to evaluate individual student development, as well as provide grade level feedback toward validated instructional objectives. The research-based subtests are predictive of later reading proficiency and contribute to a composite score that is the single best predictor of later reading development. The measures are consistent with many of the Common Core state standards in reading, especially those for foundational skills. Combined, the measures form an assessment system of early literacy development that allows educators to readily and reliably determine student progress in kindergarten through 8th grade. I provided some of the Dibble scale here as well as the legend because the legend is really where the meaning is. So you have the scores across the table. And what's important to note is if you look at the blue, which is the top one, this means that the child has negligible risk. Nearly all students in this range score at or above the 40th percentile rank on the criterion measure. The green, which is just below the blue, shows that the child is at minimal risk. About 80% of students who score at or above the 40th percentile fall in this range or above. Yellow shows that there is some risk now present. And red shows the child is definitely at risk. And with yellow and red, attention must be paid. But with green, clearly, more work needs to be done, and the child should still be receiving the proper explicit instruction in order to achieve the proper educational needs. So let's go to Fidelity and talk about it. And I use the header here, know it and love it, but I do have a caveat for that. Educational researchers and practitioners concerned with implementing a specific curriculum, program, practice, or strategy, collectively termed interventions, frequently refer to fidelity or how closely the implementation was aligned to the way that the intervention was designed. At its heart, fidelity is the scope, the sequence, the pace, the teacher to student ratio by which the program should be followed in order to have the greatest chance of gain. As with all things, though, that's a measure. To develop a measure, you had to have a pool of subjects. So fidelity is that measure by which the greatest gains can be made for the certain subtest or subset of subjects by which the program was tested on. With dyslexia, what this means is it tends to be the more mild to mildly moderate children. This is not the moderate or severe, and this certainly does not take into account comorbidities or additional specific learning disabilities. So as we discussed in part 1 of this series, some children, i.e. those for whom the program was specifically designed around, AKA the target group, they're going to thrive under fidelity. We as advocates, we fight for fidelity because at its heart, it's the best application of any given program. But what I mean by that is in my fight for fidelity, I did not want a teacher to student ratio greater than 6. I wanted 4 sessions a week at a bare minimum of 45 minutes per session. That was, after all, the fidelity of the program being applied. But what about those children that were not deemed the target set of children? We've been discussing the educational equation for each child, and this is why individualization is so important. Given the educational equation for your child, fidelity may be too fast of a pace. And if so, the child may be equally as frustrated under a program delivered to fidelity as they would be inside of a classroom dedicated solely to balanced literacy. Advocates highly encourage knowing what the fidelity statement is for the program that your child is using and fighting for it. But what we also need to be encouraging is understanding how your child fits with that program and adjusting appropriately. Do this with evidence and the necessary data to support the needs of your child. So with regards to written expression, it refers to highly complex cognitive self-directed process. Higher order components including planning, translating, drafting, reviewing, and revising. The translation process includes lower level transcription skills, i.e. handwriting and spelling, and text generation at 3 different language levels: word, sentence, and text. Reading and writing draw upon the same body of knowledge and skills. If you want to be a reader, you must perceive the separable phonemes within words, recognize the most common spelling patterns, link meaning to the words in text vocabulary, understand the grammar well enough to permit comprehension, trail cohesive links accurately, and recognize and use discourse structure. Texts are organized, and recognizing this in a text improves comprehension. Of course, background knowledge plays a huge role in reading comprehension too. So the readers know more about the world, the better they may do in reading. Yep, learning to read requires all of that. We know that written expression is critical. We know that written expression must be taught explicitly in conjunction with explicit reading instruction. Mastery of written expression aids comprehension. Without mastery of written expression, comprehension will only go so far. As Natalie Wexler said, as she was following Judith Hoffman, documented in Knowledge Gap, written expression is really like a second language. It must be taught explicitly. It must be mastered. It's a critical component. But again, I want to stress that it must be in conjunction with reading instruction. Moving on to accommodations. It's really important that we understand the difference between accommodations and modifications because they are two different things. It's quite a common occurrence to hear the words used interchangeably in meetings, but the fact is they are quite different. To use them together is to confuse everyone involved. So it's necessary to have a clear understanding of what these two words mean and what role they can play in what you advocate for regarding your child's needs. Accommodations are tools that are utilized to assist your child in accessing the curriculum. It can be a wide variety of tools, from a calculator to a graphic organizer to more time on an exam. Within our website, we have a robust list of possible accommodations. We recommend that you peruse this list and discuss them at length with your child if they're old enough, and decide which of these tools will best assist your child in their education. Remember, too, that accommodations may change with time. Be cognizant of evolving expectations and potential new areas as new content is introduced. Now, let's talk about modifications. Modifications means to modify the curriculum. For example, a math test may have 100 questions, but given the circumstances for your child, 100 questions may be too many. It may be entirely possible to measure the child's grasp of the content with 20 questions versus 100. The grading structure would need to be balanced to make the modification fair, but the point is that the curriculum is adjusted, aka modified, to make it more accessible and suitable to the child's needs. So you see, they are two very different things, and we hope that this explanation has helped break down the difference between the two. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on our website. So every child is different, and the need for various accommodations may change as the years of school advance. For example, an accommodation that suits a first grader may not suit a seventh grader, and vice versa. It's important that you meet your child where they are, that you level the playing field appropriately, and you ask your child for their input. Be aware that one of the key statements we hear from parents when schools propose eliminating certain accommodations is that the child isn't using them. But the biggest caveat to be aware of here is that accommodations can't just be handed to the child, but that the child must be taught how to use certain accommodations. For example, speech to text has various intrinsic software challenges. A child just can't be handed speech to text and be expected to use it seamlessly the next day. The same way goes with graphic organizers. They have, like having to be taught explicitly how to write, a child must be taught how and why a graphic organizer can be used to assist them in their writing. An accommodation given to a child without teaching the child how to use the accommodation is an accommodation in name only and not in practice. So in that case, it's wholly worthless to the child. And of course, they're not going to be using something that they don't understand. This is the list of all of our accommodation lists that we have on our website. So I want to jump from accommodations to assistive technology because when we talk about accommodations, assistive technology plays a really important role here. So per IDEA, the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, an assistive technology device is defined as any item or piece of equipment or product system, whether acquired commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of a child with disability. This means that it can be low tech, i.e., graphic organizers on paper, or high tech, meaning speech to text. The key to assistive technology is that it must truly meet the individualized and prescriptive needs of the individual who has the need. The severity of dyslexia, as well as the combination of additional SLDs, comorbid conditions, and what those specifically are, can make each individual unique. For the unique individual, some tools are just going to be better than others. What we encourage our community to do is to find the right tool that best suits the need of the individual. Don't buy into the mantra that your school district may say to you that, well, this is the tool that we just give everyone, because that might not be the right tool for your child or even for you yourself as the adult. And the school does bear the responsibility of needing to find the right fit for the child and providing the right fit for the child. I like to compare assistive technology to trying on a pair of shoes. I'm a size 9, and if I go out and I buy every size 9 pair of shoe possible in every style, design, heel size, whatever, not all of those size 9s are going to fit. Some of them are going to be way too small. Some of them are going to be way too large. And some of them, frankly, I'm going to fall down in. Finding the right shoe is important. Finding the right assistive technology in order to level the playing field and give your child access to the curriculum is equally as important. To give you an example, this is a list of 8 different various speech to text tools. I've also included the link to an article ranking various speech to text tools. So depending on the tool, there can also be a significant learning curve. So plan well and take the necessary time to find the right tool and understand the world that you're entering. We recommend having assistive technology evaluations done during elementary years prior to middle school and high school, where the required output will be enabled by the right tools. Delay is a little challenging because if you think about the curriculum of middle school versus the curriculum of elementary school, the expectation of output is going to be from day one. You have to request an assistive technology evaluation. They're still going to take the time to do it, then provide you with a report, and then have an IEP meeting to discuss the assistive technology evaluation. That's going to take time, and that's time that your child is losing where they're not able to access the tools that they need, may not be able to access the tools that they need in order to perform properly within the classroom. So the earlier you do the assistive technology evaluation, the better. Here are several links to assist you in your assistive technology journey. And don't forget to check out Alphabet Soup in our quarterly newsletter. The articles can also be found in the blog section of our website. Each entry is topic focused and provides helpful information on assistive technology. So it's just not working. So now what? Remember that you should see results relatively quickly, meaning some progress should be visible within 6 to 8 weeks. What I mean by that is your child should not go from a complete non-reader to reading War and Peace within 6 to 8 weeks. That's completely unrealistic, and that's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is you should see your complete non-reader making access with the code and beginning to have some progress in their ability to read within a 6 to 8 week period. If you don't, then either Fidelity isn't being followed, or it is, but Fidelity is too fast of a pace for your child. Maybe there's other specific learning disabilities or comorbid conditions complicating the educational equation for your child. Maybe the program isn't the right program. Maybe having science of reading and remediation and balanced literacy in the classroom is confusing the child. There could be any number of details, but it's important to dive into those details and find the answers. And unfortunately, answers are not always going to be easy to obtain. You may need to request further evaluations. You may need to protest the evaluation with an independent educational evaluation, or IEE. And if you have the means, to bring in an advocate or any number of possible avenues. The point is, don't give up. It's so important. Don't give up. So I'm going to end here with showing you our recommended list for reading. We have a pretty big list on our website, but I also want to hit real quick on some of my favorite core books. Specifically on general knowledge, I would start with In the Early Years of Your Child's Life, If Only I Would Have Known by Faith Burkowski. It's a three book series. You can buy each one separately, or you can buy the whole thing together as one book. But it's really great, and I highly recommend it, especially for young parents. Makes a great baby shower gift too. Failing Students or Failing Schools, also by Faith Burkowski, is really fantastic. I discussed that one earlier within the presentation. Raising a Child with Dyslexia, What Every Parent Needs to Know by Don Wynn. It's a really heartfelt book. Don Wynn is dyslexic himself. It's quite a powerful book. I do recommend all parents read it. The Teacher Who Couldn't Read by John Corcoran. Of course, our Bible, Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz. The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler, one of my favorites. Why Johnny Can't Read by Rudolph Flesch. Conquering Dyslexia by Dr. Jan Hasbrook. And Helping Students Take Control of Everyday Executive Functions by Paula Moraine. And of course, we've got some general resources and some helpful links. I hope that you found this presentation helpful, and I wish you the best on your journey. So if you've not watched it, please check out our first session, and session 3, when it is published, will be on our website as well. Thank you.